California, 1972. A state known for its beaches, sunshine, and a killer lurking in the shadows. Herbert Mullin, a man whose mind was his worst enemy, would go on a rampage that shocked the nation. But what drove him to murder? Was it insanity? Or something far more disturbing? Herbert William Mullin was born on April 18, 1947, in Salinas, California. He grew up in a strict household under the guidance of his father, a World War II veteran who emphasized discipline and control. Despite his father's rigid nature, Mullin was a bright student, excelling in school and even being voted most likely to succeed in high school. However, beneath the surface, darkness was brewing. At 18, his best friend, Dean Richardson, died in a car accident. This tragedy deeply affected Mullin, triggering an obsession with death and reincarnation. He began constructing altars in his room, convinced that he could communicate with the dead. His fascination with Eastern philosophy and religious doctrines soon spiraled into a dangerous mix of paranoia and delusions. As he entered his early 20s, he began experiencing auditory hallucinations. He heard voices warning him of an impending natural disaster. The voices told him that he had a mission: to prevent an earthquake from devastating California. The method? Human sacrifice.
My name is Herbert William Mullin, and I was born on April 18th, 1947 at 6:06 a.m. My earliest memory was I was crawling on my hands and knees, and I was looking into a puddle. I saw myself and the redwood trees reflected, and the sunlight, the sun, and I touched the sun with my finger, and it created little circular waves extending outward in all directions. I felt peaceful and calm, inquisitive, curious, content, grateful, and hopeful.
Mullin's mind continued to deteriorate. He experimented with LSD and other hallucinogens, further distorting his perception of reality. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, yet his erratic behavior went largely unaddressed. Attempts at psychiatric treatment were inconsistent, and he frequently moved between institutions before ultimately slipping through the cracks of the mental health system. By the early 1970s, Mullin's paranoia had escalated to new heights. He became convinced that he was the only one who could prevent California from being swallowed by an earthquake. The voices in his head told him what needed to be done. He needed to offer human sacrifices to appease nature. And so, the killings began.
I was thoroughly indoctrinated into the ideas and concepts and belief systems of Roman Catholicism. Many of those doctrines and concepts require a great deal of faith that isn't based on logic or reasoning. I think that was detrimental to my mental health. I was a good Catholic. I said my prayers every day. I went to church every Sunday. I made sure that I went to confession at least once a month. Between October 13th, 1972 and February 13th, 1973, I did in fact murder 13 people.
Between October 1972 and February 1973, Mullin embarked on a brutal killing spree, murdering 13 people in seemingly random but ritualistic fashion. His victims were varied: homeless men, a priest, campers, students. The methods were equally erratic: bludgeoning, stabbing, shooting. Each killing was, in his mind, a necessary sacrifice to prevent catastrophe. October 13, 1972. Lawrence White, a 55-year-old homeless man, was beaten to death with a baseball bat. Mullin later claimed White had telepathically asked to be sacrificed. November 2, 1972. Mary Guilfoyle, a 24-year-old college student, was stabbed repeatedly. Mullin disemboweled her and spread her organs along the roadside, believing it was part of the ritual. November 2, 1972. Father Henri Tomei was beaten and stabbed inside his church's confessional booth. Mullin said the priest willingly offered himself as a sacrifice. January 25, 1973. 4 teenage boys camping in Henry Cowell Redwoods State Park were gunned down execution style. He later claimed they were interfering with his spiritual mission. February 10, 1973, Fred and Kathy Francis, along with their 2 young sons, were murdered in their own home. The attack was particularly brutal, further cementing Mullin's belief that he was fulfilling a divine purpose. The killings were chaotic and lacked a consistent pattern, making it difficult for police to track the murderer. His spree sent shockwaves through the community, as residents feared they could be next. Mullin's reign of terror finally ended on February 13, 1973. He had just shot and killed Jim Johnera, a former high school acquaintance, and his friend Kathy Francis. Witnesses saw Mullin fleeing the scene and reported his car's license plate. Police quickly tracked him down and arrested him without incident. When authorities searched his home, they found detailed writings outlining his belief that he had prevented a catastrophic earthquake through his murders. He believed that without his sacrifices, California would have been destroyed. Mullin's trial was one of the most bizarre in California's history. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but prosecutors argued that his ability to plan and evade capture proved that he understood his actions were wrong. He was ultimately convicted of 10 murders and sentenced to life in prison. Psychiatrists who evaluated Mullin diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, but the jury rejected the notion that he was completely unaware of his crimes. The court ruled that while he was mentally ill, he was still legally responsible for his actions. Herbert Mullin was sentenced to life in prison for 10 counts of murder. He was denied parole multiple times and remained incarcerated in California until his death in 2022.